Okay, Paul, I'm gonna need you to walk me through this one because I don't want to blow an orphanage, man.
I'm done with high school.
What does that mean?
Well, I don't learn anything.
You know this is like the third time you've replayed this exact same scene, right? No, it isn't. Okay, which cable do I cut then? The blue one? Dude, just to stop looking at Instagram for 10 minutes and we're done, it's not
maybe
that
if
hard.
your movie wasn't so boring, I would pay attention and we'll be done by now.
I hate having to do. Just cut the green one. Sure, whatever. Do you ever get the feeling that art has slowly turned into background noise? Like TV shows and music are now designed to quietly play in the back while you do something else, like, I don't know, look at your phone, which, statistically speaking, you're probably doing right now. It's easy to blame the fact that we're no longer paying attention on the idea that nobody makes good stuff anymore. But what if the real issue isn't only the quality of the content, but the way we are experiencing it? What if the reason media feels worse now is because we stopped paying attention to it? So what came first? Did media got worse and that's why we stopped paying attention, or did we stop paying attention and that allows streaming companies to flood us with a slop? Well, it's kind of an egg or chicken situation here. One thing we do know for sure is that most of us are barely paying attention anymore. A recent study found that something like 83% of Americans use a second device while watching TV, although that number could be as high as 93%. This trend has led to some streaming companies, like Netflix, to allegedly make their content more second screen friendly. Apparently, the company has been handing out notes to its screenwriters, encouraging them to focus on simpler narratives and heavy exposition, like characters constantly explaining/repeating the plot, or describing what's happening on the screen so viewers can follow the story even if they're not looking at it. Audiences, of course, have been picking up on this trend and have coined the term typical Netflix movie to refer to this particular brand of movies/TV series.
Talking about this rise of like the algorithmic friendly entertainment, right? The ambient viewing stuff.
So much of their TV, especially TV, needs to be made in a way that almost assumes the viewer is not paying attention, right? Like the idea of, when I call it a second screen show or whatever, of like someone's basically scrolling Instagram while they have the Netflix show on in the background. So the Netflix show needs to be as sort of obnoxiously, loudly plotted as possible so people can kind of track what's going on. And it sort of points to, I feel like a lot of dissatisfaction a lot of people have with how TV is these days. Of like, why is it like this? It's like, well, they're kind of assuming the worst of you.
However, this dip in quality might not be the only reason why you're enjoying less this content. Recent studies have found that constantly switching between your phone and whatever you're watching can actually reduce how satisfying the activity feels. This kind of behavior can create a vicious cycle where you check your phone because you're bored, but by doing so, the thing that you're watching becomes less engaging, which makes you check your phone even more, and so on and so on. This matters more than you think, because if viewers are distracted, then the shows that survive are those that are easy to follow even if you miss a few moments. But here's the thing, this whole idea of media as background noise isn't actually new. TV and radio before that always had this quality to it. Back then, people didn't have a second screen but would leave the TV on while doing chores or, whatever people did for fun in the 1900s. Background content has always been a part of media. The difference here is that it used to be contained. Historically, this kind of background TV mostly lived in daytime television in the form of soap operas, talk shows, game shows, daily actor TV series, and reality TV in general. Which, if you think about it, is the same type of content being affected by this whole second screen friendly movement, such as rom-coms or dramas that were never gonna have the deepest of plots in the first place. So the problem isn't so much that background content is being made, the problem here is when the consumption of this media becomes the norm. The original purpose of this TV slop was to fill the 9 to 5 gap when people would be out at work or school, and was mostly consumed by stay-at-home moms, elderly people, or sick kids without access to cable or internet for that matter. But the existence of TV slop implies the existence of TV peak, and that's exactly what networks would deliver during prime time. From about 7 PM to 10 PM, networks had to compete for the biggest and most valuable TV audience of the day. Since brands paid top dollar to advertise themselves during this time window, networks had to put out their best shows during this time slot to bring as many viewers as they could. This competition is what brought us the so-called golden age of television, with shows like The Sopranos, Lost, Breaking Bad, The Walking Dead, and Game of Thrones, to name a few. So TV always had background content, but it also had a structure that forced networks to fight for your attention by delivering peak content. The thing here is that streaming collapsed those boundaries. Now everything lives in the same endless catalog competing for viewers. Now, to be fair, early streaming services didn't immediately break that model. If anything, they built upon it. If you take a look at the data, the early to mid 2010s saw a steady stream of above average TV ratings and a spike of prestige shows across both TV networks and streaming services. This was a time where streaming services had to compete against TV networks in a more traditional way to get some of that sweet primetime audience. And in order to do that, they had to make a name for themselves. This is why Netflix took a chance with shows like House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, Black Mirror, and even Stranger Things. People subscribed for that exclusive content and stayed because suddenly they could binge watch the entire catalog of shows whenever they wanted. This lasted for a while until the studios came to the realization that they were leaving money on the table by licensing their content instead of creating their own streaming services, which led to platforms to compete against one another, triggering the so-called streaming wars and created a second golden age of television. But growth couldn't last forever, and by 2022, subscriber growth across the industry started slowing down as people were finally allowed to go outside. Streaming services for the first time in years had to shift their focus from growing their subscriptions to figuring out ways to actually turn in a profit. That made high-cost niche prestige projects harder to justify unless they could drive subscriber acquisition or retention. It was around this time that Netflix began to prioritize shows with a high completion rate. The idea here was very simple. If viewers don't finish season 1, they probably won't return for a season 2. This, however, created what Paul Tassi describes as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Viewers become hesitant of starting new shows because they might get cancelled, so they wait until the show is completed to watch it. Which means new shows struggle to find an audience, which makes them more likely to get cancelled, which makes viewers trust new shows even less. Now, to be fair, this is a very Netflix-specific problem for two reasons. First, Netflix doesn't have a rich parent company. Apple TV and Amazon Prime can afford to fund these niche prestige shows because they are backed by trillion-dollar companies. Which is why they can also throw $500 million to produce what's essentially a very expensive Lord of the Rings fanfic. Second, Netflix doesn't have a 100-year catalog of content to fall back on. HBO, Paramount, or even Peacock have decades of existing shows that they could survive off if they really wanted to. Netflix has to build that library from scratch, which means volume matters. So why fund one critically acclaimed show with a relatively niche and small audience like Mindhunter when for the same price you could fund 3 shows with mass appeal? There's also the counterintuitive problem that great content doesn't always fit binge logic. When something truly resonates with you, whether it is a movie, a show, or a song, it creates an emotional peak, and peaks are hard to follow. Let's say you just finished watching Interstellar. Netflix would probably throw your way a bunch of sci-fi movies, but the reality is that there are not many movies like Interstellar, are they? I would even argue that even if you take a look at Christopher Nolan's very impressive catalog, I don't think you can find another film that resonates this well with audiences. So if you don't have generational wealth to throw at massive projects, and the few fancy projects you do make barely get watched, and the people watching them are only half watching, then why even bother? Instead, platforms optimize for something much easier to measure, which is retention, how much they can keep you on their platform. And if the system is designed to reward the content that keeps playing, then background content will always win. Which is also why Netflix produces an endless stream of low-quality true crime documentaries. They are cheap to make, they are evergreen, and they're really easy to binge watch. So what about music? Well, something interesting started happening on Spotify around 2016. Rumors began circulating in the music industry that Spotify was quietly filling some of its most popular playlists with ghost artists. In 2017, Vulture reported on the matter, stating,
Spotify is reportedly gaming the system by paying producers to produce songs that are then placed on the service's massively popular playlists under the names of unknown, non-existent writers.
Spotify of course denied this accusation, stating that they have never created fake artists and that all music on the platform was properly licensed from the rights holders. Later that year, journalist David Turner started digging into Spotify's data and noticed something strange. In ambient playlists like Study, Relaxing, Chill Hop, and so on, established artists like Brian Eno and John Hopkins were slowly being replaced by artists that nobody seemed to know anything about. These artists had millions of streams with basically no sign of existing outside of Spotify. Turner eventually traced much of this music back to a Swedish production company called Epidemic Sound, which specializes in stock music and you probably heard of. This prompted journalist Liz Pellet to dig even further. In a great article titled "The Ghost in the Machine," she spoke with multiple people inside the industry who confirmed that anonymous tracks were indeed being commissioned and distributed through Spotify playlists. Pellet was able to uncover something called the Perfect Fit Content Program through internal documents. Under this program, Spotify employees were tasked with incorporating this commissioned music into extremely popular ambient playlists. Why? Because Spotify's own internal research had apparently found that many listeners weren't coming to the platform to listen to specific artists or albums. They also didn't seem particularly interested in discovering new music, they just wanted something to play in the background. And in that kind of lean-back listening environment, most users didn't even notice what artists they were hearing. So the incentive was pretty obvious. Why pay full price royalties to artists if users are only half listening? Why not just commission cheaper music that serves that exact background function? Now at this point you might be thinking, so what? So what if Netflix wants to produce a bunch of dumbed down shows? And Spotify wants to produce background music? What's the big deal? After all, nobody's forcing you to watch or listen to any of this. Okay, and you know what? That's fair. The issue here, as I said before, isn't that background content exists, is what happens when background consumption becomes the dominant way we experience media. Because once this happens, shows and music begin to behave less like art you need to actively engage with and more like functional content. Something to help you focus, something to help you relax, or just something to fill the silence while you scroll through your phone. And once media becomes functional like this, something else becomes economically viable. Automation, which opens the door to AI-generated art. Once again, why pay artists to produce original content when you could produce a cheaper, more profitable product that can perform the exact same function? Those same incentives that led Spotify to profit from passive listeners in genres like piano, jazz, or chill hop are now being exploited by companies flooding the platform and its listeners with AI music in more popular genres. Take an artist like Sienna Rose, who recently had not one, not two, but 3 songs in Spotify's viral 50 USA playlist. People had suspected for a while that Mrs. Rose here is a product of AI, but is she? Till this day, nobody's 100% sure. If you, just like me, know absolutely nothing about music production and listen to the songs, they actually pass the ear tests. Her profile feels kind of generic, but to be fair, most artists don't put that much effort into it in the first place. One problem of labeling all AI-generated art as a slop is that it undermines our ability to recognize it in real-life scenarios. When people think of AI music, they tend to think of something obviously broken or low quality, like that weird We Are Charlie Kirk song. But that's not always the case. The reality is that most of this AI-generated music is usually polished by humans who know what they're doing to make it sound like it came from a real artist. In fact, a recent study made by The Verge found that people were able to successfully identify whether a track was AI or human-generated only 43% of the time. Gabrielle uploaded this great video where she explains how easy it is for a music producer to take one of these AI-generated songs and tweak it just enough so it passes the ear test. She also talks about the case of Morphy Campbell, a singer and songwriter who got 2 AI-generated songs imitating her voice being uploaded to Spotify without her consent. She even shows you how easy it is to steal the work of smaller artists through these AI music generators.
Since music is more being made for like the playlistification of music, people care less about the artistry and albums of full pieces of work these days. I feel like this AI creep plays into this exact trend of music. So it sneaks into playlists, radio, and shuffle on streaming platforms, almost without people really noticing or if they're not paying attention.
And if you still think I'm exaggerating, the other day I went to the mall and on my way out I listened to these 2 songs that I'm 95% sure are AI generated. This is a perfect example of how easy it is for AI-generated music to displace human music when the incentives align. Stores and malls can't just run Spotify publicly, they actually need commercial licenses to be able to play mainstream music, which usually involves paying another company to do so. The two songs you just heard most likely come from a company called Bandtrack that provides AI-generated music to malls and public venues in general. Once again, why pay full price for the chance to play mainstream music or even license background music when no one is listening to it? Why not just pay for a service with an ever-growing catalog that can adapt to your every need? You could make the argument that this is one of the few places where using this type of services is actually valid, as music is being used as literal background noise and the songs belong to a private catalog, so they're not competing against mainstream artists. Now, this type of music might not compete with mainstream artists, but it does quietly remove an entire tier of working musicians whose job was to create that background layer. And while no one is making entire TV shows with AI, you can already see how the incentives line up. If viewers are only half watching and the goal is simply to keep something playing in the background, then AI generated starts to make a lot of sense from an economic standpoint. Once again, why spend millions producing a show you hope people will watch when you could instead invest in technology that generates the exact kind of shows the viewer asks for? Again, we don't have the technology to generate full-length TV episodes right now, but this is what Will Smith looked eating pasta like 4 years ago, so only God knows where we'll be in 10 years. You can already see AI sort of displacing reality TV with that weird Love Island Fruit AI generated show. When you combine all these factors, there's one more thing you begin to notice. Culture itself begins to look algorithmically optimized. If you want to see what that looks like in practice, all you gotta do is open YouTube and look at your homepage. Not right now, just open another tab, please stay. Every single video, including the one you're watching right now, has been optimized for the algorithm. The thumbnail plus title follows the exact same tried and tested formula. The videos are edited in a way that keep you watching by throwing an audiovisual stimulus every 6 seconds so your brain doesn't get bored. The topics are similar enough to the videos you've already watched so they feel safe, but slightly different so they feel new. That's not an accident, it's the result of a platform where success is increasingly determined by what the algorithm rewards. How we got here is a fascinating story for another day, so please be sure to subscribe. The thing is that when success depends on being easily understood by an algorithm, artists naturally start making work that fits the system instead of challenging it and taking risks. And you need to take risks in order to create great art. This risk aversion also affects streaming services. Netflix and streaming services have created a business model where everything works by releasing their shows and films directly into a massive catalog where everything quietly exists next to everything else. As writer Will Tavlin puts it when talking about streaming films, but by insulating their films from failure, the streamers have destroyed the meaning of success. Now, this doesn't mean algorithms kill creativity per se, but it does make the whole ecosystem less friendly to risk-taking and less effective at discovering new talent. Thierry Fremont, the head of Cannes Film Festival and a frequent critic of streamers, once posed this question during a press conference. What new directors have been discovered by streaming platforms? And that's a really good point. How many big name directors got their start directing a straight-to-streaming movie? So what can you do about it? The reality is that not much. As I've discussed in this video, streaming companies mostly answer to economic incentives, and it would take a massive social movement to change them. Piracy isn't really a solution, as it removes revenue from platforms and creators that are already struggling, requires technical literacy, and overall lacks social scalability. So the only thing you can really do is change the way you consume media. That might just mean actually watching the thing you chose to watch, not what the algorithm feeds you, putting away your phone for a bit and giving it your full attention. Treat it like an event, not just something you have on the background. Make a conscious decision of what you want to watch before opening Netflix so you don't mindlessly scroll through the platform for 10 minutes only to get bored and end up watching the same 2 shows you always watch. With music, you can try to listen to full albums from time to time instead of just defaulting to those made-for-you playlists. And if you still want some of that good lo-fi in the background, there are plenty of real non-AI options on YouTube or even DJs mixing that kind of music live. Another thing you can do is just to separate how you use media. Not everything needs your full attention. Background content is fine when you're doing chores, working, or at the gym. But things like movies, shows, or albums you actually care about should be something you engage with intentionally. And last but not least, just listen to the recommendations from your friends and family, if you have any of those. You'll probably be subjected to some of the most heinous shows imaginable, but there's also the chance you stumble onto a hidden gem. And honestly, if you're gonna get recommended a slop anyway, it might as well come from a real person. Worst case scenario, you at least have a new topic of conversation the next time you see them, which never hurts. I'm that guy when it comes to recommending stuff, and I cannot tell you how much it warms my heart when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, that thing you recommended, it was pretty good." None of this is about becoming some kind of media purists, and I do believe that background content has a place in our lives. The problem comes when we start expecting all art to be as easily digestible as background content. Great art always asks something from you. That's the price you have to pay. You have to slow down and focus to actually immerse yourself into it. And in return, it lets you experience life from a different corner, to step into someone else's world and feel what they felt when they created it. And just like with most things in life, you only get to enjoy it if you're fully present. And maybe that's the bigger battle we're losing here. Our ability to sit with something and just let it in. But what do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with all my jab? Please let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.